Welcome to the Brattleboro Literary Festival. This session, we have two amazing writers. Deesha Philyaw and Kelli Ford have both written extraordinary books about navigating a path through faith and personal truth. How do you forgive a church that has betrayed you? How do you belong to a group that denies your experience? Philyaw and Ford have explored these questions in stories about women of color that cleave to the reader long after the books are finished. Deesha Philyaw's collection of stories, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, has been shortlisted for the National Book Award. Kelli Jo Ford's novel of connected stories, Crooked Hallelujah, won the University of Central Oklahoma's 2019 Everett Southwest Literary Award. Hybrid Vigor, a story from Crooked Hallelujah, won the Paris Review's 2019 Plimpton Prize. These wonderful writers will converse about their books for a little over a half an hour, and then they'll answer your questions, which you can post under the Q&A box on your screen. Attendees can also upvote existing questions by tagging the thumbs up icon. Deesha and Kelli, welcome. What a delight to have you guys here.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for that warm welcome. And I am so excited to be with you today, Kelli.
Thank you, Deesha. I'm so excited to talk to you about your book. And thank you, Stephanie, for introducing us so warmly and for you all having us here. This is great.
Well, we're delighted. Should we introduce Fudgy just in case?
Yes. So for everyone listening, if you hear a nice little gentle snoring, that's my baby girl pug, Fudgy, and she's really close to me. Her brother, her litter mate, passed away about a week ago, and so she's been really close. So that's the little snoring sound that you hear. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. So these great books. Go.
Yeah. I'll jump in.
Right, let's go.
So I was struck by so many things in Crooked Hallelujah. You know, gorgeous writing, the characters who I just could not get enough of, and of course, mother-daughter stuff, which is which is really close to my own heart, but also close to my book. And so, and I know our general topic for this conversation is sort of double standards, but I started thinking about, as I read, a phrase I grew up hearing, and I don't know if you grew up hearing this, Kelli, mama's baby, daddy's maybe. And this, meaning that a child is always its mother's. Dad, the father, paternity may or may not be the case, but in thinking about this idea of double standards, it also kind of speaks to the fact that, with some exceptions, women will mother. If there's a child, you're mothering that child. With fathers, there's a whole other standard about whether or not they will be present. And your book brings into the question of, what makes a father? What does it mean to be present? And what do we expect of mothers and fathers differently? And for me, in my book, the mother-daughter stuff, I kind of looked back at it after it was done and was like, oh yeah, that's a theme, because it's a theme in my own life. How much of what you did around the different standards for mothers and fathers, was that sort of an overarching thought that you had and it came out through the stories, or was it reverse engineered? How did you come to play with that?
Sure. I think that it's something that the story of the mothers and daughters was really given to me. Like sometimes when I feel like I say these things, maybe it sounds like too mystical, but I really feel like I had to write about mothers and daughters. And in the story that I was given, through some of my own circumstances and through some of my just interest in exploring and really maybe diving deeper and deeper into the relationship between this mother and daughter, the main mothers and daughters that I was writing about, there just weren't men, this is just like lived existence for these characters and for a whole lot of people, oddly. I mean, I say oddly because I've had questions since since the book came out, or like just people note like, wow, men are really treated badly in this book. And that just really like took me back, like, really, that was,
I
it
don't
was
think
so,
so.
well, it was so surprising to hear, or like,
Mm-hmm.
how would I feel if I were a man reading this? Like, I don't know. How should you feel? Like, do you see something? But so I think that, I come from a family of I lived in a household of 4 generations of Cherokee women. And that's the bones of where the story came from. I have a wonderful father who's a stepfather. I never knew my biological dad, but when I was a little girl, it was just women in a household of strong women. And so that's just kind of, I think, what drove me to start writing about this family of women who are fictional characters. But, a lot of that is reflecting and was inspired by kind of how I came up. And so, like, I feel like what I see in the stories are there are men present, but they, again, as you said, they have a choice to leave. And I feel like the mothers in both of our books, however they show up, whether they're really, they're a hero in the moment or they're really failing, like they don't seem to have a choice, like the motherhood is something they're going to see through, whatever that looks like. Yeah, I was thinking, because I've gotten so many questions like that as I read your book, I was thinking about the men, and I was wondering, have you had questions like that, how men are portrayed in your book?
Yes. So my friend Damon Young, he wrote a memoir, What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker. And he was one of the first people I was in conversation with back when my book was still only on pre-order. But he read, an advanced copy of the book, and he said, men in this book are garnish. And I have just been using that ever since, like, you notice garnish, it's there on your plate, it is not the meal, right? And so I just thought, well, yeah, that's kind of a really good way to put it. And then I've noted sort of the reaction of men who read the book, and it tends to be pretty consistent along certain lines. They were all expecting erotica and didn't realize they were going to get something deeper. And they see the book as sexier and racier than women readers seem to see it. They all comment on that. And I think there's commentary there as well. And what I think it says is that men don't know enough about our interior lives. They don't read enough about our interior lives, or they don't talk to us enough to know about our interior lives. And so books like mine and books like yours show this interiority, I think that's a word, about women's lives around sex and other things, that it's right under their nose all along. But it's not always our stories that are centered, and so they don't always know. So that's what I've heard from men, and about the way that men show up in my book. And I just want to add that there was a moment when I was in college for a couple of years where there were 4 generations of women living in my house as well. And it was just the 4 of us. When my great grandmother had Alzheimer's and she came to live with us, my father was also around, but not in my house. So the parallels as I was reading were just so incredibly striking that I was folding pages until I was like, I got to stop folding pages. I'm going to fold this whole book. And so I just appreciated seeing how a story that, while different from my own in many ways, still told so many truths that I could, that really resonated with me, and that I really enjoyed seeing told and centered. Because again, our narratives are around, but they're not always centered. And so I just appreciate that you did that with your book.
Thank you. And maybe that's the thing. I was thinking about it. There are so many women readers and women authors that it seems like men are an important part of both of these books, whether it's their absence or their presence. So I was thinking, like, what is it that's not that's unusual about the men in this book, you know? And
yeah.
Really,
maybe
really
it's not that they're not centered. Maybe, I mean, even though you have whole sections where the narrator is a man, I always still felt that this was Justine's story, that this was Reenie's story, that this was Lula's story, that this was Granny's story. And there were, you know, people, and it sort of decide like who's the sun or is it, yeah, who's the sun and who's in orbit, you know? Right. And I think that that's what's happening here, and we don't always get to see that. And if you know, and I don't want to make a blanket statement about men, but depending on what men are reading, are they reading books where they aren't centered? And so then our book seems to be so revolutionary when in a way it's not. It's like, this is how we live, you know, this is real life.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So can we just take a step back? I want to hear the story. Like, how long did you work on The Secret Lives of Church Ladies? What was the first story that you wrote that made it into the book?
So I am of an age where I don't remember things so well. So it was either Eula or Peach Cobbler. I can't remember which one I wrote first. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's an early reader of everything I write, and she thought Peach Cobbler was first. I thought it was Eula. Eula was the first that was published. That part I do know for sure. I just can't remember if it was the first one that was written. And I've been trying to write a novel since 2007 and got about 2/3 of the way, kind of stalled. And then I started writing these stories, and my agent heard me at some events reading these stories. And after one of the events, she said, you know, I like these church lady stories. And I hadn't been thinking of them as connected at all. I didn't see the connection. And she said, you know, while you're on hiatus, she was being very generous from your novel, you know, what if you wrote a collection of these stories and we focused on that, and then you can always come back to the novel. And she's like, maybe that'll feel less daunting. Not that it's easy to write a short story collection, but in that moment, it did feel less daunting to keep going with stories rather than going back and trying to salvage this novel. And so that's how it came about. And so that was maybe 4 years ago, maybe a couple more. No, well, I think the oldest story is probably 4 years. And so then maybe that was 2 or 3 years ago that we had that conversation. So the stories are as old as that. And then there were some that were written last year to round out the collection once it was sold as a partial manuscript to West Virginia University Press. So once she suggested that, that's when I got intentional about, because you know how it is as a writer, you've got pieces of stories and things in different states of readiness and drafts. And I thought, well, I'm going to take some stories I already have and get really intentional about putting a church lady in there, or someone who I call church lady adjacent, meaning she herself is not a church lady, but someone who is very influential in her life is. And then then it became, okay, now I'm writing a collection. So it was, it's a detour away from a novel. So that's the short answer of how it came about.
Oh my, what a wonderful detour.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just interrupt one thing? We had an attendee who would like to hear the titles of your books. I think he came in late, and to hold them up again. So Deesha's ready and armed here. Here we go. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw and Crooked Hallelujah by Kelli Jo Ford. So thank you. A quick interruption there. Little commercial.
No problem. So Kelli, I was really curious about your book as well, because in some ways I felt like I was reading multiple books in one, but I love that because everything was so unexpected. How did it all come together?
Sure. I was it took me a really long time to finish this book, because I didn't think of myself as a person who was writing a book for a long time. If I think too big, I kind of tend to get paralyzed. And I want to come back to that thought and ask you about plot in a minute. But so I was just writing one short story after another. And they started to come from the same places and the same family, even if I didn't realize it. Maybe I thought that I was trying to it felt like a deficiency of some sort. Why can't I just write why do I have to write about this family? Am I leaning on something? But it would turn out like maybe I was trying to write a different family, and give it a woman a different name, but it was really Justine. So many times it was really Justine I was writing about. And so it just started to become clear that I was writing about this family, and that's what I needed to keep doing. But, I was always so interested in place. And so it made it kind of a weird collection. Some stories took place in North Texas. Some stories took place in the Cherokee Nation, which is in kind of like right in the northeastern Oklahoma is where the Cherokee Nation is, but it's in the southern part of the Cherokee Nation. But so as I wrote, I just, I tried to figure out, are these going to be thematically linked? They seem too alike to be thematically linked. And so it was just a process of when I began working with my agent to figure out what was the most important narrative and maybe the one I was most drawn to. And that was Justine and Reenie's narrative. The earliest story that I wrote that made it into the book is one of the fire stories that occurs in the last third of the book. And that, Justine is the narrator of that one. And so eventually I had all these stories. I had stories from when the great-grandmother's in an orphanage as a little girl. I had stories when Justine was younger, but in order to try to rein it in somewhat, I kind of went back to the origin story when Justine becomes pregnant with Greene, and that sets off both of their narratives, I think. So yeah, that's a big roundabout answer, but it's fitting maybe because, for so long I was just sort of wading through this water and I couldn't really see my feet because I was just writing kind of what came. And it's hard for me to pull out and think about what to write because it did feel like these stories were coming. And so writing a new book that I have an idea for a new book, but I've never really written from an idea. And so I don't know what that process looks like. I'm hoping eventually it shifts from an idea to something that feels like it's pouring forth. Yeah. But so that I wanted to talk to you about plot, because when I was reading these stories, it felt, I felt like I was just being kind of led around like by it was masterful, because there were times when I'd get to the ending and I'd be this sort of, we talk about the inevitability of an ending, right?
Yeah.
As readers and writers, when it's just it's delightful. And it's of course, why didn't I see that coming? That's the only way this could have ended. And there were times when there was that kind of inevitability. And then there are other times when I thought that I knew where we were going, but no, you totally turned my expectations on their heads. And specifically, I think that I could probably choose any of these stories and talk about what you did with plot and where you took me and what I was expecting as a reader. But I'm thinking specifically about Peach Cobbler.
Okay.
And then the story, Dear Sister.
Oh.
Yeah, because, when you're threading through the what does the grandmother do? Does she have can you remind me in Dear Sister? Is it she smells something?
Oh no, she's dreaming about fish.
She's
and
dreaming.
So when you dream about fish, that means that somebody in proximity is pregnant. And I grew up hearing that, and so when I was a teenager and I knew somebody who was pregnant, who was also a teenager, and my family's dreaming about fish, and I'm it's not me. I promise it's not me. And so, that's something that stuck with me. So yeah, I gave that to the grandmother, that fishy dream.
But the last line, I didn't see it coming. And I was taking notes. I was being, a studious reader. And I got the last line, oh my God, of course, that's perfect. And I loved the story so much more. I already loved it. The first narrator, the letter, but it just felt I was in hands of just you just knew every turn, everything is so intentional. And then in Peach Cobbler, by the same turn, I was thinking, oh no, the narrator, she's going to make that Peach Cobbler for the Reverend for the good, bad reverend. Like she is going to be making him peach cobbler. Or like, you know, it's just a story. I was so like, I felt like I was so connected to these characters. I was cheering and no, don't do that. No, don't do that. Or I thought, oh, she and what's his name, Trevor, they're going to be brother and sister. And you just
Yeah.
fit my expectations, you know, and it just felt so masterful. So I guess I'm wondering, like when you're writing plot, like, do you sit down and have, do you know where you're going? What does that look like for you?
You know, I think you might have helped me figure out why I can't write that novel. Yeah. It's just that with a novel, like, I think at least the way my mind works, you kind of have to know where you're going. And that's been difficult for me, but I don't impose the same thing on myself in writing a short story. And I guess I shouldn't do it with the novel because clearly it's working for the stories, but I don't know why. I think that if it's bigger, I've got to know everything. Maybe it's because you're walking down a dark path and it's like, well, it's a dark path to, you know, that's just half a mile up the road versus a dark path to another state, you know, like that's the difference. That's what it feels like. But for the stories, I don't worry about like, where is it going to go? Before I say that, let me just think for 1 second. I can't think of any of the stories where I felt like I knew when I started. If anything, I might know like a first line. Like that is often how a story starts. It's the first line is where it starts, or somebody said something, and then I got to figure out, you know, all of the things around it. How did we get there? But but the stories I didn't plot out. And it's interesting you mentioned Peach Cobbler, because that's one where I wrote the first draft of it, the first of several drafts of it. I wrote an ending that I thought was amazing. Trevor and Olivia were adults. They connected in adulthood in like their 30s. And they have this moment. She has a bakery. Their parents have died. And she's been carrying this secret all along. We won't say what the secret is. But she finds out that he knew too. He found out as well. And so then they have this really sweet moment that, again, I thought was great. They baked the cobbler, they had sex. Like, what could be better, right? In her bakery. And no one who read that story liked that ending. Nobody liked it. And I loved it, but it just wasn't working. Peach Cobbler has been rejected more than any other story in that collection.
That's my favorite one, I think.
And people say that. So that just says all writers understand this is all very subjective. Don't take it personally when things get rejected, right? And so I was like, okay, well, what if I don't take them into adulthood? What if the story ends, you know, when she's a teenager? What does that ending look like? And so I played around with that. But yeah, I can't say that I plotted those out. It is sort of figuring out and trying different things and sort of seeing what fits, and then, you know, discarding, you know, things. I don't ever throw anything away. But some of the pieces in one story that I wrote like 3 years ago showed up somewhere else in a different story. So it's cobbled together a little bit. So.
So I have a question for both of you. I found the relationship in both books to the sacred versus the really strong sense of place that you both developed, a really interesting dialectic there. Could you talk about that? I mean, you know, sometimes the faith community can be a real haven for people. And when that heads south, that's a big problem, you know. But you know, in Kelly's book and Crooked Hallelujah and in Secret Lives of Church Ladies, there are both other things that kind of move in to take that sacred place. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Maybe not.
I everything froze for me for a little while. I was wondering if you could repeat the beginning of the question, or I will listen to Deesha, and that would be really interesting too, because I'm not quite sure how all of it.
Deesha, I'll reiterate the question.
Okay.
So it's asking about faith, the role of faith and place in our books, and what happens when, instead of being a kind of an anchor and a mooring place, the church and faith becomes something else, something that isn't an edifying, a source of edification. I try to, and I continue to try in my conversations about my book to make it clear that the church, that again, it's the women who are centered and the church is in orbit, as opposed to the other way around. And so I read Kelly's book with that in mind, wondering about, again, playing with that sense of orbit. And again, Justine was the center and the church was in her orbit, even though, and Kelly puts a finer point on this in her book than I do in mine, even though the church would have it be the other way around, that the church and God and all that's supposed to be the center, and then we're just sort of all the in orbit of that. And so I saw Justine's resistance as flipping that and saying, however imperfect I am, I'm the center. My child and I, we're the center, or she's my center. The church is not. But that was still not, quote, about the church. That was still about this particular woman. And that's really important to me in my collection as well, that the church is one of many facets of women's lives that may be something that can be a source of comfort, a source of something they have to overcome and unlearn, but it is a facet. It can be a looming facet. It can be something they got to get from under, but again, it is one facet. And so that was important to me with my book. And so when people ask me, what's your book about? I say my book is about Black women, sex, and the Black church. And I meant that in that order, and that's intentional. And so, Kelly, am I on the right track that that's how you viewed the church in your book as well? Or is it, would you say it's a book about the church, ...
No, absolutely. I think Justine and more, to me, I feel like it is ultimately Justine's story, but Justine's story is trying to raise up Greene and help her have a better life. And I see her as a character who is really in some ways haunted by being rejected by this faith that she's been taught is everything. Even as she was rejected as a teenager, she might have come back. But that act of being rejected by that thing that you're told is most sacred and necessary for wellness in every sort, really kind of haunted her. And I feel like, as you said, maybe they live up under it. I feel like that in that way it haunted her and she was never quite able to escape. And one thing that I really loved, and in the way that we can become attached to characters we live with for a long time, felt like I wanted for Justine. As I read your book, I felt like so many of the women had achieved a freedom from that. However they were raised, whatever their mama taught them, they achieved kind of a freedom that Justine couldn't quite. She was able to achieve that for Greene, which I think was ultimately her goal. But she couldn't for herself. And I really admired that about your characters and where you placed them. Absolutely. That's how I see your book, that it's about Black women and sex in the Black church, like that's in that order.
Yeah.
I feel like I have chills. I feel like I say an amen for real.
Did you feel like, as we were, when you were reading my book, I was reading your book, like the parallels got eerie at a certain point. We both had mother characters who said to their daughters verbatim, "Don't be like me." I had to put the book down. I was like, how is this happening right now?
I have chills again because, right. And they're coming from such different places. When Justine utters it, it's almost like a prayer.
Yeah.
And when we hear that in Peach Cobbler, it's not a prayer. She's I don't know. I want to live with both. I feel like, are you going to keep writing about the characters in Peach Cobbler? You feel done. Yeah.
That's the one that people keep saying, like, I what happened. I want to know what happened next. And I'll give a little bit of a spoiler, but Olivia shows up again in the instructions for married Christian husbands, and that was not intentional. I, like you said, where it's given to you kind of thing. So I'm writing that story, and that was the last story I wrote in the collection, even though it's not last in the collection. And I wrote that line where she says, "I make the best peach cobbler in town." And I was like, it's her, it's her, it's her. She showed up. And I think it's because like readers, I couldn't let that girl go. Like my heart was broken for Olivia. And I think in my subconscious, I needed to know how things turned out for her. You can debate whether she has a happy ending or not. And in some book clubs, we've had the question, is she a free woman or not? And that idea of being free shows up in your book too. And I just love that. I love that. I love those parallels that show that sort of through line, that through our cultures and through time, so much of the journey for a woman is getting free.
And then, I'm sorry, I'm just jumping in, but also at the end, the responsibilities and the flipping relationships of daughters to mothers is another parallel that we had, that, when you think about getting free, we mentioned, how so often mothers are just mothers and are going to mother to the best of their ability, whatever that looks like. And then in the end, even when daughters have chosen not to become mothers themselves, we see this caretaking that is woman-centered, and there's a brother helping. Yeah, but that was another similarity I saw in our books. There was a line, let's see if I can find it. She understood how your heart was still connected to your mama, even if she hurts you sometimes. That just felt like that could have come from Justine in the hospital when she's with her mom who's had a stroke. And she's thinking about the ways that she feels like her mother has not been able to be a mother for her, and how that affected Greene. And it just felt, I really connected to that part, and it felt really moving and sad and just so real.
Yeah. I mean, there's a point where we hope it happens when our mothers are still alive. I can't say that it did. My mother has passed away. When we recognize our mothers as people, and it's not, and I used to think it would be, we realize that our parents aren't perfect. Like, we know that, but it's when we recognize them as people, and like what happens when that realization, sets in. And that happened at different times for your characters. You've got the chain of mothers and people recognizing that their mothers are people who had desires, who had dreams. And then as a daughter, what do you do with that? Or should you have to do anything with that? But what do we owe our mothers? Like that. I was at a talk, and Kiese Layman was being featured, and someone asked him that question, what do we owe our mothers? Oh my gosh. I was like, that you could spend a lifetime answering that question. For the characters in your book, and there's so many pairings that we could pick, but let's just pick Justine and Greene. What does Greene owe Justine, would you say?
Oh, I think that she owes her everything. And I think that it would take her getting away probably to realize it. Like, that act of her leaving that small town, Bonita, is the first step in her realizing that. I think that she owes her, all of it isn't good, but I think it, when they're described as like the sun and moon for one another, I just think that what comes with that is beauty and difficulty, and and I think the act at the end of Greene showing up for her mom and accepting her who she is in that moment is like the act of accepting all of that, the good and the bad. So I think that Greene would recognize that, but I think it would take some space to do so.
And we need that space as daughters, but we're also told that, you know, you can't, that we're not encouraged to take that space, many of us, and yet it's the thing that could bring us closer. I'm going to read something that you wrote in towards the end of Crooked Hallelujah, where Justine is talking about pitch, and his father, I think his father has passed away at this point. I tell him to get over it, buck up. This is the way of things. Kids grow up. We either end up just like our parents or do our best to turn out nothing like them. If we are lucky, we by God make a little better of all the things we can. Short of some terrible interruption, parents go first. That's the way of things. Of course, we work ourselves stiff in the meantime and cry ourselves dry, but maybe we get to have some little something that fills us up in our time. Our mamas and daddies, we don't have long to get over the loss or celebrate the release, as the case may be, or our time here will be gone too, and our own kids will be burying us. I told him some version of this for about the 400th time before he left, and he stared through me like I was a piece of hay blowing in the wind. Greene says it hasn't been very long, and I need to let him work through it, that he's depressed. To that I say, who the fuck ain't? Listen, I was like, that's a whole word right there.
Oh, you guys, it's so great. It's so great. We have a few questions, and one of them was that the folks wanted to hear you read. But here's one thing. Can you mention some of the books that influenced you? Other interconnected collections you're thinking about as you write, for instance?
Sure. I will just go quickly and first and say Love Medicine. That was my kind of like my shining star for a very long time, and it still is. I think it's the perfect book, but I would love to hear, Deesha, what influenced you in this amazing book?
I would say that my influences were less about sort of craft and structure type books, and it was more about permission. And so there are 3 books that either while I was writing or even since I, you know, finished the book, that gave me a piece about having written exactly what I wanted to write without worrying about, you know, how people in the church were going to think and, you know, who wouldn't like it. And those 3 books are Heavy by Kiese Layman, in which, you know, he talks about his relationship with his mother, which is many things, and one of those things is abusive. And so the complexity of relationships and being able to tell the truth about mothers, our mothers, and also other mothers, that in, you know, in my book, the characters that are mothers. Basi Ikpi, who wrote a memoir called I'm Telling the Truth, But I'm Lying. And it's about her life with, as someone who has been diagnosed with bipolar 2 and anxiety. And the book that some publishers wanted her to write is not the book she ended up writing, but she ended up writing the book she wanted to write. And her example was really encouraging to me. And then the same for Nafisa Thompson Spires, The Heads of the Colored People, which is a short story collection. And I started reading the first story and I was like, oh, this is Black and nerdy and quirky, and I am so here for it. And she just wrote stories like we've not seen before. And I felt, I mean, I don't know, I haven't asked her this, but I felt like she didn't worry about who was going to like it and who was going to buy it and all of that stuff. She wrote the stories that lived in her head, and I felt like I can do that too.
Such great answers. Thank you. Thank you. Another question here. Okay. What was the book Kelly recommended that popped up? Was that that was Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich? Is that?
It's Love Medicine, yes. And here
we are.
That one looks like it's always close by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Very good. Very good. Okay. And let's see.
Could I jump in? Do we have time for Deesha to read just a little bit?
Oh, I'd love it.
Because
Great.
it's not every day you get to hear a National Book Award finalist read.
Yes. Yes, good.
Sure. Kelly, do you have a preference?
No, I want to read.
Okay.
I want to hear whatever you are drawn to
Okay.
right now.
I enjoy reading the first 2 paragraphs of Peach Cobbler. I really like that. My mother's peach cobbler was so good, it made God himself cheat on his wife. When I was 5, I hovered around my mother in the kitchen watching, close enough to have memorized all the ingredients and steps by the time I was 6, but not too close to make her yell at me for being in the way, and not close enough to see the exact measurements she used. She never wrote the recipe down. Without having to be told, I learned not to ask questions about that cobbler or about God. I learned not to say anything at all about him hunching over our kitchen table every Monday, eating plate after plate of peach cobbler, and then disappearing into the bedroom I shared with my mother. I became a silent student of my mother and her cobbler making ways. Even when I was older and no longer believed that God and Reverend Troy Neely were one and the same, I still longed to perfect the sweetness and textures of my mother's cobbler. My mother, who fed me TV dinners, baked a peach cobbler with fresh peaches every Monday, her day off from the diner where she waited tables. She always said Sunday was her Saturday and Monday was her Sunday. What I knew was that none of her days were for me.
Oh,
thank you.
It's so wonderful. Oh, golly, you guys. I have one quick question for both, and it may not be a quick answer, but how has the pandemic affected your writing? Is it great because you don't have to go out and you're just, it's you and the page, or what?
Not for me, no. My husband and I both work, and we have a 7-year-old who's in full-time virtual school. And so time is hard for focus as well as for reading. And when I do have what feels like solo moments, my mind is just sort of on. I feel like I have what is the news of the last 3-minute brain. So it's not good for me. I'm hoping that continued reading is just trying to remain faithful. Deesha?
Good.
The great thing about kids is that they get older. And so my 11th grader is in virtual school. So that's different. You know, I don't know what she's doing in there, honestly. I'm really honest with you. I hope it's going well. We have parent teacher conferences coming up, so I guess I'll find out. So it's different. It's different when you know, the kid, that your child can be independent with that, because that becomes a job. So for me, and I'm a homebody, I kind of like the fact that no one expects me to be anywhere now, and that feels good. And one thing that we found in this pandemic is, especially at the beginning, there was just this proliferation of writers offering workshops. And so I thought, well, I'll just take some of these workshops. I mean, when you finish writing a book and you're like, okay, now what am I going to do? And I wanted to try some different things. And so I took a satire writing workshop with Rian Amilcar Scott, who is amazing. And his book, The World Does Not Require You, or World Doesn't Require You, is a fantastic collection of short stories. So I jumped at the chance to be in a workshop with him. And I tried my hand at writing satire with a little bit of magical realism woven into it. And so I've had, I think at least one thing published during this time, and that was it. So in that regard, you know, I did something that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise, but that's only because my kids are older. You know, my youngest is about to be 17, my oldest is about to be 22. And that's a different stage of life for a parent, you know, and a parent writer. That could be a whole panel.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you both so much for your brilliant conversation and your wonderful books, which are Crooked Hallelujah by Kelli Jo Ford, and The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw. Yay! These are available through bookshop.com and also from your local independent bookseller. as well as some unnamed giants, but we won't go there. And head over to the Brattleboro Literary Festival, or it's brattleboro.literary.festival.org, to see who else is coming up and to donate if you are so moved. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. What a delight.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Kelly,
you.
I'm going to email you. We got to keep this conversation going.
I would love to. It's such an honor to talk to you. So thank you so much,
too.
Stephanie, for making this happen.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie.
Great. Yeah. Great.
Bye,
Thanks
everyone.
so much. Have a great day. And
bye.
Give Fudgy a kiss for us.
Yeah.
I will. She's completely knocked out. Thank you all.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.